Swing weight in tennis. You may have heard of it, but what is it and why does it matter? Let's start with an example. We've got two rackets here. Both weigh about the same, within a gram or two, but one of them feels significantly heavier to swing, and that's because of swing weight. Arguably, it's the single most important measurement in terms of how your racket feels to play with. In this video, I'll give a general overview to what swing weight is, how it affects your game, and I will show you how you can measure it at home with an app that you can download from the App Store. So firstly, what is swing weight? Well, it's kind of what the name suggests. It's how heavy your racket feels to swing. It is different from how heavy your racket weighs. Why is that? Because it takes into account not just the weight of your racket, but how that weight or mass is distributed along the racket itself. A simple way to think about it is the more mass you have towards the head of the racket, which becomes what we call head heavy or head heavier rackets. If there's more weight towards the head, then you're going to have a high swing weight. If the mass is distributed more towards the handle, so this is when you start having a head light or head lighter racket, that's when you're likely to have a lower swing weight. And in physics, from what I read, basically it's what's called the racket's moment of inertia. It's how resistant the racket is to being rotated. And why should you even be concerned with this? You need to know that even very small changes to your racket, for example, the weight of the strings, if you have a vibration dampener, if you add even small amounts of lead, even how many grips you put on your racket, they all add mass and distribution of mass, and they all affect the swing weight, which in turn will affect how your racket feels when you swing it. What are the effects of swing weight? So let's first consider a high swing weight, which basically means the racket feels quite heavy when you swing it. So a high swing weight is great for plow through. Once you get that racket moving, it should keep moving. It's going to plow through the ball. You should get more stability if you don't hit the ball quite in the center of the racket, but it will feel heavier and potentially it will be slower to swing. In terms of who that suits, it's great for quite strong players or tournament players who can potentially handle that extra swing weight. Conversely, let's look at low swing weight. So again, that's where you feel like the mass is more distributed towards the lower part of the racket and it feels quite light when you swing it. So low swing weight rackets are they're very easy to swing. They're very maneuverable. If you think about for volleys, when you've got to get the racket moving very quickly from side to side. However, you might find you have less power because there's less mass or swing weight going into the ball, and you may get more shock on off-center hits. And generally that suits potentially beginners or club level players who really want to prioritize having easier to generate racket head speed. Now, swing weight is a little hard to measure. You don't just get it by putting your racket on the scales. That's just the static weight of your racket. Swing weight's different. Swing weight is dynamic. It really happens when you're actually swinging the racket, but also the fact that it changes based on the exact setup of your racket. For example, with strings, if you're using a thick gauge string, for instance, a 16 gauge or a 1.3, those strings are heavier than if you use, let's say, a 17 gauge or a 1.20 millimeter string. And therefore, the thicker string will have more mass distributed towards the head of the racket. It will feel heavier to swing. So your racket, you really need to measure the dynamic swing weight based on how you set your racket up. Now, there are professional machines to do it. You or I at home, we're not going to buy them. They cost a lot of money, and frankly, for most people, you don't really need to go all in to understand this. It is good to have an understanding of it, however, because you may find that if you're struggling to generate racket head speed, it could be actually that knowing the swing weight and then how to redistribute and balance your racket could actually really change the way the racket feels. So you can actually do this at home. There's an app on the App Store that I use, which is called swing tool. And effectively what it's doing a swing test or a pendulum test. You put in a few calculations. I'm not going to go into those. There's a great guide on the app. Basically, you set the racket and you hang it from a certain point. You swing the racket, you set the phone up by the side with the app, and it will do about 16 side-to-side swings, and then it will tell you the swing weight of your racket. For me, it seemed to be pretty accurate, and from what I read of reviews and other people using it, it seems to be fairly accurate. You're not going to use it for a precision test, but it is going to give you a good indication of the basic swing weight of your racket. So what would be a good recommendation for different players? Well, if you're a beginner or a club level player, firstly, swing weight is measured in kilograms centimeter squared, or kg/cm squared. And you might hear people talk about swing weights in things like 310 or 320 or 330. And then you might say swing weight is increased by 10 points. What that means basically, if someone says I've got a racket with 330 swing weight, they're saying 330 kg/cm squared. If you increase it by 10 points, it's going to go up to 330. That's all it means. So for most club players, the swing rate is probably could be 310 to 325. I mean, again, this is entirely subjective. For tournament and advanced players, they might be going between 325 and 340, particularly if they can generate and get the racket head moving. It can be advantageous to have that little bit more swing rate to get more power, more plow through. But there are some trade-offs again with things like maneuverability. Pros can go even higher, maybe 330 to 360, but it's arguable that in the modern game now, where rackets are getting lighter, swing rates are potentially coming down a bit. Now you can customize, firstly again, things like the strings, even if you put a vibration dampener on, how many grips you put on, they all add mass to the racket, but the most common way of changing the balance and distribution of weight is to add lead or tungsten tape to your racket, which can be done at different positions like 12, 10 and 2, 3 and 9, or even at the handle. And those are ways of redistributing the weight to change the characteristics and adjust the swing weight. Back to these two rackets I have, how come they weigh basically the same, but one has got a much higher swing rate? Simply because I have extended one of these rackets, which changes the balance point, which now redistributes the weight to different parts of the racket, which now means even though they weigh the same, when I swing it, it does actually feel quite a bit heavier to swing, and the swing weight is quite a lot bigger. This one, which isn't extended, is about 322 kg/cm squared swing weight, or 322. This one's 343, even though they weigh basically the same. So to wrap up, swing weight is one of the most important factors in terms of how your racket feels. Certainly there's also things like stiffness, which are going to influence it. You can measure swing weight by yourself at home. It's pretty easy for anyone to do, probably takes about 10 minutes, and the app only costs a couple of pounds, Swing Tool. Be really interesting to hear your take. I'm obviously not an absolute tennis pro or a master of physics, so if you have any experience, comments or thoughts about swing weight, then please do drop it in the comments. Everyone loves to read and share, so go for your life.